Hello everyone, welcome to another deck profile with me, Chocobilly. Now, as you can probably tell, I've got a bit of a cold, so apologies about that, I'm sounding all bunged up. And also, as you can probably tell from the deck, we're looking at a rainbow deck today. So, this is actually the deck that I played at the Athena Store Championships this weekend just gone. And I came 30th. So that gives you a good indication of its viability as a competitive deck. Ironically though, a lot of the competitive decks that were played do have something similar with this deck as so much as they were Rainbow, but they were running a different backup engine and they had a fairly big different focus on the forwards they played. Whereas this is meant to be just a bit more fun, turn some heads and blindside your opponent, but ultimately it is a lot of fun to play. If it gets going, it really gets going. But it does suffer against, some of the big weaknesses are water and earth water, and yeah, things like Leviathan and Une really screw with this deck. So, as you can tell from the name, Mognet, it focuses very heavily on the backups. So I'm going to start with the backups, then I will go into the forwards, and then finally the summons. It's not a huge amount to say about the backups, other than they're all Moogles, and they can be used to generate different things. So, I'll start up with Mogmobius, sorry. So this is actually a very useful effect, because what it does is it allows you to be able to search any forward, and there are a couple of back attack forwards in this deck, so you've got Sephiroth and you've got Sonon. So it means that if your opponent does attack, and they forget Mogmobius is standing up and what its effect is, you can go searching for one of those forwards and play it onto the field. And that also combos nicely with Hurdy, when you can pay a Fire, Ice, Dull, and put Hurdy into the break zone to play a Fire or Ice forward of cost 5 or less from your hand onto the field. So obviously that's a hefty payment you've just made, because you've paid 2 Earth and broken Mogmobius, and then you paid Fire, Ice, and broken Hurdy to then play said forward. But if it gets you out of a sticky situation, and it plays something like, I don't know, Warrior of Light to be able to block and kill something, it might just be worth it. Then we've got Class 9th Moogle, obviously can generate Wind CP, but also Ice. Just another means of being able to generate multiple or different types of CP when you don't have Moogle FFTCG down on the field, because you ultimately will need this card. You can play the deck without it, and by that I mean as in just not drawing it, but really to be able to do what the deck is supposed to do, you do need this card. But you do have at least means of kind of brute forcing your way to other elements as well with these sorts of backups. Class 10th Moogle as well, similarly you can generate Lightning CP as well as the Earth with this Moogle. Mog 13-2, so I have one of these in the deck, and it basically just buffs your Sarah by 1 CP by 1000 power, but also when it's put from field into the break zone, you can choose one forward and freeze it. The only synergy there really is Susanoo. So when you play Susanoo, you can put this into the break zone to then freeze a forward, which is kind of funny, I guess, but ultimately it's just more variance within your backups, because you are probably going to be running 5 Moogle backups. There's only one backup in this deck that isn't a Moogle. Shantoto, obviously, but it just means that you do have some other more variance in what the Moogles you're playing, and yeah, it just allows you to hopefully not brick too much. And then, just making Sarah become a 7k, because we're running the, obviously, Moogle Searcher and Discarder Sarah, so it makes her become 8k, which means she's a bit more powerful when she attacks. Then obviously Hurdy, you can use them to freeze a forward if you want, or dull and freeze a forward, or like I said before, you can play a forward onto the field. But really, he's in this deck because he gets played off of Mont Blanc, and that is something you do need, is a bit more consistency. So being able to play Mont Blanc to then discard 2 ICP to play the Hurdy, and remember it does have to be ICP you discard or pay for Mont Blanc's effect to get Hurdy onto the field. Mont Blanc and Hurdy and Moogle Brothers are really your only consistency engine in this, outside of, Sarah being able to search any Moogle. But, yeah, so you do need to rely on those cards a little bit just to get you more Moogles to hand. Now, there are 17 backups in the deck with Moogle Brothers, and there's 2 Shantoto, so there's a total of 15 Moogles that it can get you. So there is a chance it can miss, definitely, but hopefully you'll reveal at least 1 to be able to get something to your hand. And then, obviously, Mont Blanc, just for that bit more consistency. Moogle FFCC, I don't need to explain why, it can generate everything. And then Shantoto, again, because it's just a nice big old board wipe to get rid of stuff. If you want to, you can put it into the break zone for Sonon's effect, and it can actually fulfill the part of the lightning backup. So it might be a case that you remove Moogle Brothers and Shantoto from the game, at which point, obviously, you can play another Shantoto if you so need to. But again, obviously, it can generate every element, so it does fit nicely within the deck's theme. It just obviously doesn't get reactivated by Sarah if you do get an attack off. Now, let's move to the good bit. the forwards. So Zidane, I'm pretty sure anyone that's been to a competition recently or a tournament has seen this card to no end. It is a disgustingly good forward, and to be honest, discarding a fire card and a win card from hand to play this card turn 1 is well worth it, because it's just immediate pressure is horrifying. So yeah, not much more to explain than that. Hope. So there's quite a few different utilities for Hope. Obviously, when an active character your opponent controls becomes dull due to your summons or abilities, you can freeze it, and then when a dull character you control becomes active due to your summons or abilities, choose up to 2 characters you control, activate them. This effect will only trigger once per turn. So with the activation, you've got a couple of means there. You've got Sarah. When she attacks, all your Moogles can become active. You can then choose 2 other characters to then activate those as well. Now that does mean when you attack with Sarah, and if you have Shantota on the field, you can actually activate her as well. It also means that you can activate some other forwards and utilise their abilities. Now what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to jump straight to the forward that is the basic reason I built this deck, and that is Terra. So the category 6 backups you control can produce CP of any element. There are no 6 backups, but you can pay a fire until the end of turn. Terra gains plus 2,000 power and haste. Pay 1 ice, choose one character, freeze it. Pay 1 water, choose one character, dull it. And then you've got fire, ice, water, dull, choose one forward, break it. So, as you can probably see where I'm going with this is, because obviously all your backups can generate every element, provided you have the Moogle FFCC, you can just lock down your opponent's board. So, the idea is that you pay either an ice to freeze out the backups, or anything that's dull basically, and then pay the water to dull things out. Now, if you're paying the water to dull things out when you have Hope on the field, it then immediately becomes frozen as well. So you are able to just keep on paying water, all those things that are dull, are active, are now dull and frozen. And that's the fantastic thing about this, is the fact that you can, it's a character, right? You can dull freeze monsters, forwards, or backups. And you attack with Sarah, activate your backups on the stack, use Terra 5 times, dull and freeze things, reactivate everything, dull and freeze things, and you can see how this can quickly swing in your favour. The one problem is your opponent has to let you set up to that point, and anyone that's playing fairly won't let you set up to that point, but it can happen if they break, so there's that. But yeah, ultimately, just bear in mind Terra's effects for most of these cards, because they all synergize nicely with Terra. And then also, on top of the Hope reactivation as well, we do have Asura, so obviously you can reactivate all your backups, or you can activate 2 forwards if you wanted to. White Tiger, the Sea, Nimbus. There's only 1 in the deck, but it's just having a nice big brave forward I did feel was important. Now obviously you need to play for him through your backups alone, and they have to be the correct element, so that is one stickler. I did have more, but then I took him out because I found I was never playing him. But ultimately he's a big forward that can keep on attacking, keep on shutting things down and freezing stuff, whilst also still standing up as a threat. Gilgamesh FFBE. Now this is obviously a one-off, and it's unlikely that you'll get his full effect, but you can fairly easily actually get his effect. So, if you have 3 or more different elements among the cards in your break zone, Gilgamesh FFBE gains 1,000 power, haste, and first strike. And if you have 7 or more, Gilgamesh FFBE also gains brave, and he can attack 3 times on the same turn. And then when Gilgamesh attacks, choose one character. If you have 5 or more different elements in the break zone, dull and freeze it. So yeah, obviously you can attack 3 times and make it so that your opponent's forwards go dull and frozen, or backups or whatever, you know. But yeah, now, as you can tell, there are loads of different elements within the forwards, so it shouldn't be too hard to get to the 7 elements. However, you do require to have one particular element in there which is hard to get there, which is either light or dark. And there is one lightning, if you will. Now, getting her into the break zone is the hardest part, because ultimately you either have to have discarded through your opponent's ability, or just have her on the field and die, or milled into the break zone. Ultimately, you can't pay for her as a cost, so it means that it's a bit awkward for her to go into the break zone. She comes to hand, you basically need to play her onto the field. But it does mean that when she does die, so long as you have lightning, either Zeramus or Sephiroth, because they are Ice Lightning, and Warrior of Light, those 3 cards will mean that you have 7 elements in your break zone. You've got Fire, Wind, Earth, and Water with Warrior of Light, Ice and Lightning with Sephiroth or Zeramus, and Light with Lightning. So you immediately go to those, you just fulfill all of that requirement for Gilgamesh to be able to attack. Now, arguably, You could throw a summon into the deck to make it, or a light or dark summon into the deck to make it so that you're more likely to have it in the break zone, but actually Lightning is a really, really good forward. She can pay 1 to put top 2 cards in, from the deck into the break zone, to then either dull or activate a forward. If you've got Hope on the field, if you activate something, you can activate a further 2 things. If you dull something, if you've got Hope on the field, you can freeze said thing. It also puts things into the break zone, which again funds your Gilgamesh FFBE. Now, this is where the weakness against water becomes obvious, because if your opponent does have something like Leviathan on the field, Lightning's effect when she attacks you get to bounce something is disgusting. So there's just nothing you can really do about that, unfortunately. But if she does attack and you bounce, say, herself, or no, you bounce Leviathan, probably kill Lightning, put her into the break zone. That's kind of where you want her anyway. But either way, if provided you're not in a matchup against water, actually Lightning is a very, very useful forward. Anyway, going back to Gilgamesh FFB. So yeah, it's not too hard. There are other ways of generating all of the elements within your break zone. You just need to make sure that Lightning or your light or dark card is actually sat there. Next up, we have Zeramus. So again, really standard nice card. If he is on the field at the end of your opponent's turn, all your opponent's forwards go dull. Now, if you've got Hope on the field, they also become frozen, which is, everyone forgets about Zeramus' effect. And Hope doesn't get played that often, I don't think. So that could be 2 nice little combos that your opponent doesn't take into consideration and just freeze all their forwards. Terra, already gone over this. Obviously, she's able to break things as well, but most of the time you're going to be locking things down. The only time you're really breaking things is when they have particularly nasty, persistent effects. So, something like Leviathan, for example. But yeah, it's just a means of being able to get rid of things, keep them locked down. But again, you are required to keep that momentum up. You need to, once that starts happening, you need to start pushing the game pretty quickly. Preesh. She's got a nice entry effect, but also her warp to be able to deal 8k something is nice. It's the only real way in this deck, I think, to be able to deal that much damage to one particular forward. You do have Susanoo to do a board wipe, and you've got Warrior of Light to deal additional damage. You could combo it maybe with something like Sonon as well, but that is obviously quite a bit. Either way, she's got a bit of versatility there. I actually tend to play her hardcaster more often than I do warp her, because locking down a forward and a backup at the same time is very, very nice. Making sure that you lock down that Tyro on your opponent's field is really useful. Sephiroth, as I mentioned before, he's great for back attack using something like Mobius, but yeah, ultimately comes onto the field, breaks something that's dull. When he attacks, he gets to break a 2-cost or make opponent discard a card as well. Not much more to say other than that, but it's really, really useful. And this is kind of where the idea of the deck starts to come to fruition, where you start blindsiding your opponent by able to play things that they don't consider. If you really want to do, you could probably throw Tama into the deck as well, to be able to make it so you can play any of these forwards whenever you want. You'd probably get rid of Hurdy to sacrifice his ability for playing any forward you wanted. Sonon, similar sort of thing as well, but he's also an EX, which means that hopefully that can swing it in your favour. There aren't a huge amount of EX bursts in the deck. I say that there are 10, but still that's not too many. So being able to make it so that you can +5, -5 to some stuff is really useful. There are a lot of smaller forwards getting played that are just really annoying, and power loss is a very, very important tool within that. But again, back attack, really, really useful tool. Warrior of Light, I don't need to explain this card. It is broken, super, super useful, but what's best about it is the fact you don't have to cheat it in. You can hardcast it, reactivate everything, draw a card, and then just have them sat there ready to just kill stuff. Lightning, yeah, being able to attack and bounce either one of your own forwards or one of your opponent's forwards is really nice. And this sounds stupid, I know, but let's say you play Warrior of Light onto the field when you've already got Lightning. Draw a card, reactivate everything. You then attack with Warrior Light. Whatever happens, you then dull him. You then attack with Lightning, put Warrior of Light back in your hand. Main phase 2, play him back onto the field, reactivate everything, draw a card, and then you can, if you want to, dull him to then deal a further 5k to the same forward or another forward, whatever. Ultimately, there is some utility there in actually being able to be able to bounce some of your own forwards as well if they do have particularly nice entry effects. Sarah, obviously she can search you a Moogle, and you can discard said Moogle or as many Moogles as you want to dull a forward. If you've got Hope on the field, dull forward becomes frozen. Not too bad. But really you want her on the field to be able to attack, reactivate, and then those reactivations can fulfill what you want to use with Terra. So it might be just breaking something with Terra's effect, dull and freezing out your opponent's field, I don't know, maybe casting a summon, but either way, be able to reactivate everything, very, very useful ability. And then finally, Susanoo. We have 2 Shantoto and 2 Susanoo. Susanoo is a really, really useful card. What's also great about it as well is the fact you can play it onto the field and Warrior of Light won't die, but when you attack with Warrior Light, you can use that to finish something off. In one of my games, I actually ended up Susanooing, with Warrior Light on the field, attack with Warrior Light on the sack, dull him to deal 5k to another Warrior of Light, who in response dulled their Warrior of Light to kill my Warrior of Light. Both got removed. But you know, that's just the way the game goes. Ultimately, it's a really nice way to be able to just clear the board, remove those things, and hopefully get a point of damage through. And that's the forwards. As I mentioned, you can just chuck whatever you really wanted into this deck, and you can kind of see what I was saying about how a lot of the decks that got played over the Athena Store Championship, a lot of the decks have a similar sort of idea, but not quite. So they tend to run the Soiree backups rather than Moogles, because obviously Soirees are a lot more consistent, have some really good EX bursts, but ultimately they're just there and they're in the right elements, and they are just much more consistent. Using stuff like Tyro is really useful. So, you know, ultimately it's a stronger in that regard. But the forwards, you could take most of the forwards from that sort of deck and put it into this deck, and it would probably operate similarly. It's just, you know, getting to those backups nice and early. You need to have them there. Anyway, jumping on to the summons. So Asura, obviously reactivating all your backups for something like Terra is really useful, just playing another forward potentially, activating 2 forwards so that you can activate your Warrior of Light or something along those lines. Yeah, really good. Or choose one character that costs 2 less in your break zone, add it to your hand. Probably Zidane, get Zidane back, play him onto the field, remove stuff. It could potentially be getting a Moogle back to your hand and then using that with Sarah to dull something, but I doubt it. 9 times out of 10, it'll be Zidane that's getting back. Cuchulainn, the Impure, make it so a forward loses abilities until the end of the turn, draw on card. This card, super useful, especially against something like Warrior of Light. A 10k first striker is disgusting. They attack, you block with your Warrior Light, you then blank it, so then, oh, all of a sudden it doesn't have first strike anymore. Yes, they can deal 5k to something in response, but ultimately it loses first strike, and that is one of the biggest reasons that forward is such a pain, the first strike. So yeah, but ultimately there's so many annoying forwards, right? So being able to blank them and also draw yourself a card is very useful. Kusith, because you need to get stuff out of your break zone. Simple as, really. Mist Dragon, because you don't want your opponent to get stuff out of their break zone. Simple as, really. And then finally, one Cactuar, because you just want an outright break when you need it. There were more Cactuars in the deck initially, but I figured I'd focus more on having more forwards that basically do the same thing, but also have a presence on the field and probably won't deal your opponent damage. And there we go, folks. That is my Mognet deck that I ran at the Athena Store Championships. And like I said, I came 30th. It didn't do amazingly well. Quite literally the definition of middling. I think there were 48 attendees. But it was a lot of fun to play regardless. It never really bricked, and even when I've played it at some of my locals or some of my friendlies, even when I haven't got the Moogle FFTCG down, I've still had either the correct elements in my hand or on the field through other Moogles to be able to play stuff fairly consistently. So actually it wasn't too bad. The only thing you really miss out on is the Warrior of Light, because you don't really have any way of generating water outside of, you know, discarding for it, but there's no water to discard except for Cuchulainn and Impure, so it's quite hard to do. But either way, it's a lot of fun to play. I really like this deck, and I'd like to know what forwards would you guys put into this deck? How would you change it up? You could go just complete back attacks and just throw so much more in there. I mean, with the Opus 20 coming, Opus 20, sorry, coming out, there are 2 more back attacks in the deck, and they are in ice, so in the right element. But ultimately, you know, it's a lot of fun to play, and let me know what you guys think of it, and let me know what you throw in, what you take out. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. Stay safe, be lucky, and I will see you in the next video.